Hello, greetings. What I'd like to do in this video is focus on Chapter 12, Responding to Serial Killers. There are basically four major issues that Glover and Witham discuss in your textbook, and that is the media impact of serial killer cases, the management of departmental resources, in other words, who is in charge, and how do they communicate with each other, and of course, what resources do they provide for investigation and public information dissemination. Also, multi-agency jurisdiction, basically how do they coordinate investigations and deal with other agencies, and also the unusual complexity of the case. So this relates to the number of victims, the type of killing, what evidence and leads are present. Then your author takes us into the area of criminal profiling and how it may be used as an investigative tool, and also discusses some of the advantages and disadvantages of different types of criminal profiling. But before we get into that, McCrary has 4 crime phases of a murderer's behavior, which I think are very relevant to analyze: the antecedent, the method and manner, body disposal, and post-offense behavior. For example, with the antecedent, we go back and we wonder, well, what was going on possibly going on in the murderer's head regarding fantasy? Was this something that looked like it was well planned and thought out, or something that seemed to occur more on the spur of the moment? Was it related to particular events or days or times? And then the method and manner. For example, what type of victim does the killer select, and what type of method or methods are used to carry out killing, and also if there are torturing and dissection of a victim, and sexual assault and other violent activities. How do we put that all together to look at the method and manner of killing? And then body disposal. Where do the investigators find the body or bodies, and what is relevant about not only the location, but also potential evidence, and also the psychological, sociological aspects of how the body is disposed of. And then the post-offense behavior, and here we look at if the killer utilizes the media, or even in some cases, such as in the Zodiac case, contacts the law enforcement agency as well as the press, and tries to, and in fact in the Zodiac case, requests that the press publish writings, or additional deaths would occur. So basically looking at antecedent, method and manner, body disposal, and post-offense behavior. The author looks at the different types of profiling, and you can read about those in your textbook: offender, victim, death, DNA, crime scene, psychological, geographic, and paraphilia. And so you can read through all those. I won't go over those in detail, but I think they're very relevant to look at. But I think one thing that we have to back up and look at are some of the limitations of profiling. For example, there's the organized and disorganized killer typology. The problem with that is that we don't have we don't have research validating and demonstrating that indeed those categories do exist. So we don't have reliability and validity studies conducted, and so we have more of a anecdotal evidence, which is basically based on what the investigators or researchers think's going on from what they've read and heard or through interviews, but we need more systematic information and data. I myself am not a strong supporter of these typologies in the sense of you're either this or that, or one is this or that, for the main reason that there's a lot of overlap, and people fall in between the ends of the spectrum, if you will. Although we do see with Rosmov's victim hunting, he has different types of offender styles. For example, the hunter identifies a victim in their own home area close to where they live. In contrast, the poacher travels and looks for victims, and the troller basically waits for an opportunity while they're carrying out their regular activities. Kind of goes along with the routine activities theory you'll read about. And the trapper basically, and just as it sounds, part of the whole excitement of the killing is setting a trap and surprising or tracking or stalking the victim. Also, paraphilia profiling is relevant and helpful. And here you look at the types of paraphilias or unusual sexual behaviors that are carried out by the offender, and that relates to the fantasy and the attachment issues that the offender has. And so always investigators want to look to see if there's any particular indicators of paraphilic behavior in any crime scene. In terms of looking at solvability factors in looking at serial murder investigations, Keppel does an excellent job explaining some of these, and these are, again, extremely important. If you look at all these cases throughout the textbook, or you follow some of the cases or read some intensive studies of specific cases, you'll find that this indeed has a lot to do with it. But the quality of the interviews with eyewitnesses is very relevant. And you've seen cases before where that people get the race or gender wrong of the perpetrator, or the type of vehicle they were driving, and so on. Also, what seems to lead to the stopping of the killing. And also looking at what we have as far as obtaining probable cause to conduct search and seize physical evidence, and also the quality of the forensic work that occurs at the crime scene. There's been some crime scenes that we've read about where, especially in older crime scenes, where the public and the press actually trample all over the place, taking pictures, looking at things, and so keeping the integrity of the crime scene is extremely important. And sometimes the general public or individuals may create a lot of problems there, not even recognizing what they're doing. And also the scientific analysis of evidence. There's an interesting section in your textbook that talks about body farms, which provide us a scientific basis for a lot of information to understand a variety of aspects of how bodies decompose and decay, and the time frames, and using insects to look at that in more detail. Also, cold case units and review teams are discussed in your textbook briefly. And then getting into failures in criminal investigations, and I think that's really a very important area there, and Rosmo again discusses that in Hickey's text. Hickey, of course, does an excellent job putting this all together in a coherent, well-organized, clear manner. So the chapter really, read the whole thing, putting all the pieces together. But some of the things that are discussed, for example, are the cognitive biases that lead to errors in reasoning, the organizational traps such as groupthink, where you have a whole group thinking one thing or another, and they just kind of go with that, even despite evidence to the contrary. and also probability errors, where that there's assumptions made based on other research or other statistics. We see that a lot with, I think, criminal profilers in the press, where they get on there and they have limited information. They say, well, let me tell you that the perpetrator was a male between 25 and 35 years old working in a blue-collar occupation, and also they had a bad relationship with their mother, and they liked disco. Now you wonder, where in the world would that come from? Does this profiler have some, amazing abilities? No. In many cases, they're just using the statistical aspects and saying that cases like this that they've read about or heard about before are more likely to be this than that, and so they'll go with this rather than that. And of course, that can lead to all kinds of issues and problems. That we've seen failures regarding whether they're teams or individual, and the wrong person being blamed. I've read cases where an arrest is made of someone who clearly was not or could not be the perpetrator based on their psychological problems, yet that there's kind of that group think, everyone focusing on that person, and the big problem, of course, is that the killer still can be at large. And then maintaining objectivity during interviews and investigations, acknowledging perspectives of others is real important. Also, recognizing when you've made an error. The only way to really get better or to make an investigation move forward is to recognize errors, admit them, and learn from them and move on. When people fail to recognize their mistakes and try to hide it or just go with it, that's just setting up a situation of failure. And then knowing how to ask the right questions. And I mentioned before in a previous video about some interviewing strategies and techniques. Some of the problems, of course, in interviewing discussed by Monahan and Stedman in Hickey's book. They talk about memory bias, false positives or false negatives, weighing current factors, false correlations, hindsight bias, overconfidence, overfocusing. So again, you need almost specialized training in interviewing violent criminals beyond just interviewing or interrogation techniques and strategies. I think that one of the issues as well that I find fascinating that's put in there at the end of the chapter is a discussion of Dr. Wellner's depravity scale, which I think is just an amazing work that he's been working on for quite some time now. And the depravity scale is basically used to look at the heinous nature of crimes for juries and the court system, because a lot of times people don't know how to judge the depravity of a particular case. And so he has developed a scale that we can use to basically look at the depravity based on a low, medium, high scale with a bunch of different variables. And so that's really a helpful tool that I hope gets used more frequently in the court situation. And this wraps up this video. Thank you.